Book nibbles. Big ideas, small bites. Matthew Desmond's Evicted. Poverty and Profit in the American City is a powerful, unflinching exploration of poverty, housing insecurity, and the social forces that drive people to the margins of American society. At its heart, it tells the stories of real families in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who struggle to keep a roof over their heads while navigating an unforgiving rental market, systemic inequalities, and the cascading effects of eviction. Yet the book is more than a collection of personal narratives. It is a careful sociological study that illuminates the ways in which housing, policy, economics, and human behavior intersect to perpetuate cycles of poverty. Desmond spent years embedding himself in the lives of tenants and landlords alike, attending evictions, documenting interactions, and tracing the human consequences of housing instability, resulting in a work that is both intimate and analytical, empathetic and rigorously researched. The narrative begins by establishing the precarious world of the tenants, highlighting that for many low-income families, rent is often the largest and most volatile expense. Desmond introduces readers to Arlene, a single mother struggling to raise her children in increasingly untenable conditions. Arlene's story is emblematic of a broader reality. Despite working tirelessly, paying bills, and doing her best to maintain stability, she repeatedly faces eviction due to late rent, conflicts with landlords, or building maintenance issues that make her living conditions intolerable. Through Arlene and other tenants, Desmond shows how housing insecurity is not simply about poverty, but about power dynamics, social stigma, and the structural inadequacies of an urban rental market where landlords have near total control over vulnerable tenants. Alongside the tenants, Desmond examines landlords who operate within the same system, offering a nuanced portrayal that refuses to reduce them to villains or heroes. Sharina, one of Milwaukee's property owners featured prominently in the book, is a complex figure, a woman who takes pride in maintaining her properties and running a business. Yet her actions have real consequences for the people who inhabit her buildings. Desmond details how Sharina's pursuit of profit is both rational and systemic. She must cover mortgages, property taxes, and maintenance costs, while ensuring that her tenants pay rent on time or risk eviction. This depiction highlights a central tension of the book. In a system designed to prioritize financial stability for property owners, tenants often bear the brunt of unpredictability, and eviction becomes a tool of economic enforcement. Sharina's character embodies the moral and ethical complexity of landlords who, while functioning within legal boundaries, perpetuate cycles of insecurity and suffering. Desmond paints eviction not as an isolated event, but as a destabilizing force with cascading effects on families and communities. For the tenants, eviction often triggers a downward spiral. Families are uprooted, children change schools, social networks are disrupted, and employment can be jeopardized. Desmond recounts how Arlene's children frequently miss school because the family moves so often, and how a lack of stable housing undermines the consistency and predictability that children need to thrive. The book also examines the gender dimensions of eviction, noting that single mothers disproportionately bear the burden of displacement, juggling childcare, work, and the constant threat of homelessness. For men, eviction can contribute to cycles of incarceration and unemployment, while for women, it frequently exacerbates exposure to violence and stress, highlighting the intersection of housing insecurity with broader social inequalities. A critical insight of Evicted is the relationship between poverty and the housing market itself. Desmond demonstrates that poor neighborhoods are often sites of exploitation, where landlords can charge exorbitant rents for substandard housing, taking advantage of tenants who have few alternatives. For example, a dilapidated apartment may rent for hundreds of dollars a month, which, for a low-income family, represents a significant portion of their income. Yet the tenant has little bargaining power, and the landlord, operating within a free market system, has every incentive to prioritize rent collection over maintenance. Desmond chronicles numerous instances where tenants live with leaking ceilings, broken appliances, and unsafe conditions, showing that the profitability of such housing is built on the vulnerability of those least able to resist. In this way, the book uncovers a hidden economy in which poverty itself becomes a source of profit, creating a structural dynamic that perpetuates inequality. Eviction emerges as a recurring motif that connects individual stories with systemic critique. Desmond recounts multiple eviction proceedings, capturing the legal process, the courtroom dynamics, and the emotional toll on those involved. Tenants often arrive at court intimidated, unaware of their rights, and facing landlords with legal representation, illustrating the asymmetry of power inherent in the system. In many cases, the eviction itself is swift, with families forced to leave immediately, sometimes carrying all their possessions on the street. Desmond's vivid accounts show that eviction is not simply a legal act. It is a traumatic rupture that shapes health, employment, and social mobility. The book emphasizes that eviction is both a cause and a consequence of poverty, creating a vicious cycle in which housing instability deepens economic vulnerability. One of the book's strengths is its attention to the human stories behind statistics. Desmond follows multiple families beyond the courtroom and the apartment, chronicling their efforts to find new housing, navigate social services, and sustain daily life amid uncertainty. For instance, he introduces Lamar, a tenant whose struggle with addiction, mental health issues, and repeated evictions exemplifies the compounded challenges faced by marginalized individuals. Lamar's story reveals how eviction interacts with other social problems, creating a complex web in which health, employment, legal issues, and family stability are interconnected. By grounding the narrative in individual experiences, Desmond ensures that readers understand the human cost of policy and market decisions, making the systemic critique tangible and emotionally resonant. Desmond also explores the broader social and economic structures that underpin eviction and housing instability. He examines public assistance programs, such as housing vouchers and welfare, noting both their potential and their limitations. While programs like Section 8 can provide relief, they are often underfunded, difficult to access, or riddled with bureaucratic barriers that prevent consistent support. Desmond recounts stories of tenants who lose vouchers due to minor infractions, landlords who refuse to accept them, or administrative errors that leave families without housing. These examples illustrate the fragility of social safety nets and the degree to which individuals living in poverty must constantly navigate obstacles, red tape, and systemic inefficiencies. The book also highlights the role of race and segregation in shaping housing outcomes. Milwaukee, as Desmond notes, is one of the most racially segregated cities in the United States, and eviction disproportionately affects African American communities. Historical patterns of redlining, discriminatory lending, and residential zoning have concentrated poverty in certain neighborhoods, limiting mobility and access to quality housing. Within these contexts, landlords exploit the concentration of low-income tenants, and eviction becomes a mechanism that maintains racial and economic stratification. By documenting these dynamics, Desmond shows that housing insecurity is not only an individual or moral issue, but also a structural and historical one, rooted in policies and practices that perpetuate inequality over generations. Desmond pays close attention to the psychology of both tenants and landlords, exploring how social norms, moral reasoning, and personal behavior interact with economic incentives. He illustrates how tenants often prioritize immediate survival over long-term planning, making difficult choices about which bills to pay and which obligations to defer. Similarly, landlords, while pursuing profit, navigate moral dilemmas, community pressures, and personal ethics, balancing empathy against the demands of their business. Through interviews and observation, Desmond captures the tensions between human empathy and systemic imperatives, showing that poverty is not only material, but also relational, affecting how individuals interact, trust, and make decisions. A recurring theme of Evicted is the intergenerational impact of housing instability. Children who experience frequent moves face disruptions in schooling, friendships, and family cohesion, which can limit their educational and social outcomes. Desmond provides examples of children who, despite resilience and parental care, struggle with behavioral issues, academic performance, and mental health as a direct result of their unstable environments. These examples highlight the long-term consequences of eviction, suggesting that housing policy is not only about providing shelter, but also about shaping life trajectories, social mobility, and community stability. Desmond also examines the informal networks and survival strategies that tenants employ. Families and individuals often rely on extended kin, friends, and neighbors for temporary shelter, shared resources, and emotional support. These networks are critical in buffering against immediate crises, but they are fragile and easily overwhelmed by repeated displacement. Desmond recounts instances where tenants double up in apartments, move into substandard housing, or cycle through shelters, demonstrating the improvisational, adaptive strategies that are necessary to survive within a system that provides little stability. These accounts underscore the resilience of the human spirit, even amid systemic neglect and economic exploitation. The book does not shy away from exploring the consequences of eviction for landlords, who, while often depicted as predatory, face their own challenges. Many landlords are balancing mortgages, property taxes, and maintenance costs, sometimes struggling financially themselves. Desmond provides examples of landlords who operate with tight margins, where missed rent payments threaten not only profit, but financial solvency. While this does not absolve landlords of responsibility for humane treatment, it contextualizes their actions within a broader economic system, showing that the dynamics of poverty and eviction are mutually reinforcing, rather than solely one-sided. Desmond's work also reveals the cyclical nature of housing insecurity. Eviction often leads to a downward spiral. Losing an apartment damages credit, reduces rental options, and increases vulnerability to future eviction. Families frequently move into lower-quality housing in worse neighborhoods, face higher rents relative to income, and experience increased social and emotional stress. The cumulative effects of repeated displacement exacerbate poverty, undermine health, and perpetuate intergenerational disadvantage. Desmond's narrative makes it clear that eviction is not a momentary crisis, but a structural mechanism that entrenches inequality and limits life chances. Throughout Evicted, Desmond balances the macro-level analysis of housing markets, policy, and structural inequality with micro-level stories that humanize the statistics. He vividly captures the sights, sounds, and emotions of eviction courtrooms, the cramped apartments of tenants, and the offices of landlords negotiating leases and collections. This immersive approach allows readers to see poverty not as an abstract problem, but as lived experience shaped by institutions, economics, and human behavior. In conclusion, Evicted is a deeply empathetic yet analytically rigorous exploration of poverty, housing, and inequality in contemporary America. By following tenants and landlords through the intimate details of daily life, Desmond demonstrates how eviction is both a symptom and a cause of persistent poverty, revealing the human consequences of systemic neglect and market incentives. The book challenges readers to confront uncomfortable truths about social responsibility, economic policy, and the moral dimensions of housing, leaving a lasting impression of both urgency and humanity. It is simultaneously a narrative of individual struggle and a sociological critique, making it essential reading for anyone seeking to understand the intersection of poverty, policy, and urban life. And that's it. Matthew Desmond's Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.